of environmental genocide and governmental corruption. And frankly, I mean, I think the word cover up is being generous here. I think what we are about to go through with some experts as well as affected residents is very, very, very sinister. And of course, for the most part, the mainstream media is not covering it. If you were paying attention last week, I was on the ground right outside of East Palestine, Ohio. Obviously, there was a massive train derailment there, as well as a chemical detonation that occurred 18 months ago. Norfolk Southern, the multi-billion-dollar railroad company, derailed, and then, as evidence has shown, completely unnecessarily decided to blow up 5 cars of vinyl chloride, which is a very toxic, cancerous gas, about a million pounds of it. And the EPA and Norfolk Southern would like us to think, oh, it just vanished. Everything's fine. And there's no health problems and there's no contamination. Well, there's been a lot of dedicated individuals over the last 18 months, separate from Status Coup, including independent testers that have tested the soil in East Palestine, air, water, who have found all sorts of very, very alarming and concerning chemicals. We're going to bring them in a minute. We also have had the Government Accountability Project, which is basically a whistleblower organization trying to get a avalanche of documents from the EPA, and the EPA doesn't want to give them. And as we're going to show you pretty meticulously on this show, there seems to be some collusion going on between the EPA, Norfolk Southern, and the attorneys that are representing the residents in East Palestine and Western Pennsylvania, because there was a $600 million settlement announced in April between Norfolk Southern and the attorneys for East Palestine. Might sound good, but once you look underneath the hood, it's actually very little for the sick, let me repeat, sick residents in East Palestine and Pennsylvania. And there's been some really disturbing things, which we got into last week, but we're going to get into more here, that really begs the question, who are the lawyers actually representing? Because they're supposed to be representing the sick, poisoned residents of East Palestine, Pennsylvania. It doesn't seem like they are. I'm going to bring in our guests in a minute. We have an independent tester who has been, I think he's been to East Palestine between over 20 times. In this 18 months, he's done extensive testing. We're going to bring him in a minute. We're also going to bring in Krissy Ferguson. We've interviewed her quite a bit. She's a resident whose home is right above one of the most contaminated creeks in East Palestine. And we're going to bring in, if her tech works out, Lesley Pacey. She's an environmental investigator with the Government Accountability Project. Before I bring them in, if you missed our live stream last week, we were in Darlington, which is right over the border from East Palestine in Pennsylvania, and we had a toxicologist on with 55 years of experience. He would be on today, but he's got his anniversary with his wife. But George Thompson is his name, and contrary to the EPA and Norfolk Southern's nothing to see here narrative, he has come out of retirement because he believes that this is the worst chemical disaster in history. So I had him just do a brief recap of what his findings have been. So this is a couple minutes long. I want to play it, and then we're going to bring on our guests. So this is George Thompson, a toxicologist, 55 years of experience. It is alarming what he has found, and it is also alarming that the attorneys that are supposed to be representing the residents did not want to use his findings, did not want to use him as a witness. You have to wonder why. Colin, let's play this.
Hi, I'm Dr. George Thompson. I'm a toxicologist with 55 years of experience doing chemical hazard assessments for academia, for government agencies, and for industrial operations. I'm president and CEO of Chemical Compliance Systems that has been doing independent consulting for 40 years. I was retired from that organization until a year ago, in February, when I first read about the disaster in East Palestine. And when EPA and the state of Ohio came out and said within about 8 or 10 days that everything was safe, I knew that wasn't true, couldn't be true with what I'd seen from the chemical plumes that were going up from that rail disaster, and decided that I would look into it a bit. I started then with the Norfolk Southern Railroad train manifests, where they identified what was in each car and how many cars there were, etc., and the status relative to that fire. I have invested now about 600 hours of my own time evaluating the chemicals that were in the cars and the chemicals that were created by the partial combustion that resulted from the fire. And they're very different. For example, before the fire, there were only 8 chemicals that caused cancer. The fire produced over 120 other chemicals that cause cancer. So there are hundreds of chemicals that were involved in that plume that we saw in the media going up. That plume, I've studied someone else's publication using the NOAA high split air dispersion model, and identified that that plume covered southern Canada from Lake Huron to Lake Ontario, northern Vermont and New Hampshire, large parts of New York, most of Pennsylvania, and other plumes went southeast across West Virginia, Delaware, Maryland, to Washington, D.C. I estimate from my calculations in that dispersion model that it covered maybe 126,000 square miles of area. The court proposed settlement agreement only covers a 20-mile radius from ground zero. In my 55 years of experience, this apocalypse that occurred in East Palestine, Ohio, is the worst chemical disaster I've ever heard of. The misleading part is that nobody died on day one or immediately after this. My concern as a toxicologist is with the hundreds of chemicals that were released, there are going to be many illnesses accrue in the next 5 to 10 years. And that's already started in the first 18 months, because there has been one man that's had breast cancer. There is another man that has 2 tumors, maybe cancerous, in his brain that have now been diagnosed. And people are still experiencing illnesses a year and a half later, despite the railroad and the EPA and the state of Ohio maintaining that it's safe. So I'm continuing to work on this to provide an independent perspective as a toxicologist. I submitted a 10-page criticism of the court consent decree based upon my science and technology as to what was wrong with it. The medical expert that was used in this case was in fact not an expert. His opinions were not based on any science or data, and ignored much of the science and data that I have discovered on my own that presumably he could have done also.
So that was Dr. George Thompson. We'll put a link under this video to the full interview we did with him last week. That was just a short version. But bottom line, his analysis found there could be as many as 120 cancerous chemicals that were created from this chemical nuking of Ohio and Pennsylvania. He also found that the plume went to as many as 8 states, including Canada. So we're talking, another country. So I want to bring in now Scott Smith. I also want to bring in Krissy Hilton. Scott Smith is Krissy Ferguson. Scott Smith is an independent tester. He has done independent water testing, air testing, soil testing in East Palestine. I think you've been there, what, 25 to 30 times?
27 times, 31 rounds of testing in the last 18 months.
Also not your first rodeo. I know you from Flint. You've
Yes.
been in a lot of different communities. Your testing typically finds levels that the EPA does not. Shocking. The EPA has tarred, feathered, and smeared you, not just in East Palestine, but elsewhere. They've tarred, feathered me as well. I just want to read this so people kind of know a little bit about your background here. You were affected 17 years ago when your business was wiped out in St. Johnsville, New York. That was from oil contaminated water. This, got you involved in environmental chemical contamination. Independent testing expert, CEO of US Biosolutions. You have 25 patents for testing, remediation. Tell people, I know it's probably you can't distill it in a few minutes, but what specifically has been your testing in East Palestine? Because I know you have done much more thorough testing, I believe, than certainly the Norfolk Southern and the EPA. And you've also done testing that shows kind of a through line, a pattern, if you will.
Yeah, and I need a couple minutes to set this up. First and foremost, I'm a client of the Government Accountability Project, a whistleblower client. Thanks to Lesley, Pacey, I wouldn't be able to continue my work if I didn't have the protection that when they reached out to me last September. And Jordan, you can see firsthand, I've been through 60 disasters, starting with my own, and I'm applying all lessons learned here. And I've got a team second to none, and combined with the legal team. And what this goes down to is, I know you've interviewed Erin Brockovich, and I know her too. And she told me years ago, the closer you get to the truth, the more you get attacked. And that's what's going on here with all of us. And to set up the background on what I found is what I call potential hot zones. You take a screening level, and you've got all my data. We can make all my presentations are already publicly available. But 55% of my results, this is what you won't hear from the plaintiff's attorneys and you won't hear from the EPA. 55% of my results are within background, which is good news. So, about 45% are identified in hot zones. For example, on dioxins, Arcadis, the EPA contractor, the EPA and Norfolk Southern contractor, set the RSL residential screening level at 4.8, and that's a TEQ. So when I say
you got to break this down in English for people.
Yeah.
RSL, TEQ, what does that mean?
What that means is they set an index specific to dioxins on soil. They set an index that take, dioxins are the fentanyl of chemicals because they never go away. They built just Agent Orange, which you can see in the other media. So this is an index. So that index is set at 4.8. 55% of my soil testing is under 4.8. That is good news. And the weird thing about this, in some ways, I limit the liability of the railroad with this comprehensive testing, but they pulled the trigger with this smear campaign too early. But the thing is, when it comes to specifically a hot zone, I'm talking about when the index from the certified independent lab is 20 or above, I identify that as a potential hot zone. And it looks like around Taggart Street going into South Pleasant, for those of you who've been following us, we've identified where the potential hot zone is, where there should be follow-up testing. The EPA, Norfolk Southern, have refused to test in that zone. So the dioxins are one thing. And to go to what George Thompson said, I've been in over 60
and I just want to be clear so people know, because vinyl chloride has been the main headline in this, rightly so. But dioxins are some of the most dangerous chemicals on planet Earth, and there have been communities evacuated because of dioxin contamination.
Correct. And also for your listeners, if you Google Marilyn Leisner, the last mayor of Times Beach, Missouri, she was my guest when we came in for a Chris Cuomo town hall in September. And, what really got my attention and everybody else's, she started hearing these symptoms in less than a year in East Palestine. And she said, Scott, This took like 2 to 3 years. Well, that points to mixtures of chemicals. And the way I put this in perspective, following up with toxicologist George Thompson, I'm providing him with my data too. Like he says, the mixtures of chemicals, and he's never seen anything like this. Well, if you take all my 60s disasters, starting out with my own, the thing about East Palestine, it's like every chemical that I've ever come across and tested is present in East Palestine. That's why it's so different. So, and then these mixtures of chemicals are shared. So we're testing for dioxins in soil and also surfaces and, and in some water and, surface water and other. And we're also testing for semi-volatile organic compounds, which a subset is polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. And we're taking these polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and we can map out hot zones for there too. When it comes, and this is a little bit technical, but I can actually identify with my team of experts, and we are presenting at the Society of Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry in October. And my team of experts includes a #2 guy from the Ohio EPA in the 80s, Don Brown and Bruce Vigon. But the point is, these mixtures of chemicals, it looks like the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons went heavily into Pennsylvania and also hit around Taggart Street. But the around Taggart
And
Street
Taggart Street, for people that don't know, is where the derailment happened. It's kind of ground zero in East Palestine. Go on.
Yeah, and I saw also, my heart goes out. I saw your coverage last night of Kevin and Amy. What's their last name?
Detmar.
I looked up their address, and feel free to give them my contact info. I tested in and around their homes everywhere. I might be able to help them. I would gladly reach out to them and help them and do what I can. But they are consistent with, and for Lesley Pacey, they're literally across the street from where the crops where we found the dioxins. So all this points to you can't find what you don't look for, and the EPA has refused to test side by side. There's a timeline here, and with today's news about it's not a unified command center, it's a unified propaganda center, and I think with that breaking story, you can see that. But on a larger scale, going back to what Aaron Brockovich said, what you see here is you see the plaintiffs' attorneys, the EPA, Norfolk Southern, and these trolls that are anonymous. But the interesting thing is the legal team at GAP and our investigators are putting a lot of pieces together, and we will break that with you when we get the answers. But the point is, they're all utilizing the same narrative in posting things. So there appears to be whoever these trolls are communicating. And at the high level, the number one thing here is about the community of East Palestine. And the residents, they should be getting full access to information so they can make a decision whether to opt in or opt out. I'm not here to advise on that. It's not my place. But East Palestine, first and foremost, these residents, all I'm saying is they need information. I've offered to sit down with the EPA, as you've seen in the emails. I've offered to sit down with the plaintiffs' attorneys and go over the detailed test reports, my chain of custody, my videos, and the proof of all this stuff, as long as they do it in reciprocity. And they backed out of meetings and refused to do it because they will not share their detailed data.
And before I bring you both in, I want to mention that breaking news Scott was alluding to. This came out with the Associated Press earlier. If you have the article, I sent it to you, Colin. Hidden report reveals a lot of things have been hidden here. Hidden report reveals how workers got sick while cleaning up Ohio's derailment site. This is the Associated Press today. The creek around East Palestine, Ohio, were so badly contaminated by last year's disastrous derailment that some workers became sick during the cleanup. Workers who reported headaches and nausea while shooting compressed air into the creek bed, which releases chemicals from sediment and water, were sent back to their hotels to rest, according to a report obtained by the Associated Press. To be clear, this is my commentary, not from the articles. They were shooting this contaminated stuff into the air while residents were still in town. So that everybody knows, they did not evacuate the resident. The residents were all back as they were shooting the chemicals out of the creeks into the air. The findings were not released to the public last spring, despite residents' concerns about the potential health effects of exposure to the long list of chemicals that spilled and burned after the disaster The workers' symptoms, as described in the report, are consistent with the CDC's workers going door to door in town and who got sick shortly after. Those CDC workers got sick and left, but it was not announced to the public that they got sick. That was found out through Freedom of Information. Since then, some residents have also reported unexplained rashes, asthma, and other respiratory problems. Good on the Associated Press, but it's not some residents. There's a lot more than some residents. So I think the media, unfortunately, is minimizing it a bit. But this story is important because it shows we know that the CDC workers got sick there and left without telling the public. Now we know that workers in the immediate response were getting sick and apparently sent to their hotels to rest. My reporting shows that the EPA found vinyl chloride, we believe, as recently as May, in the soil. Vinyl chloride is what they exploded over the town and didn't tell anyone. We'll get to that later. So Lesley, I want to bring you in. So Lesley Pacey, you're an environmental investigator with Government Accountability Project. So you are kind of the home for whistleblowers to protect them that want to come out. And Scott is one of your clients. He's been a whistleblower. You've had some others. But at the moment, I don't have childcare, which has been infuriating. But I've looked through as many emails as I can today and attachments. And it does kind of look like there is a coordinated effort to bury this deep in the soil, so to speak. There seems to be, and I expect the EPA and Norfolk Southern to want to bury it. What's weird to me, suspect to me, is attorneys that are supposed to be representing East Palestine residents and Pennsylvania residents seem to be changing their tune. I know there's certain things you can address, certain things you can't, but can we just, before I get into what seems like very suspect behavior by the plaintiff's attorneys, could you explain, you have put in Freedom of Information requests for a lot of documents from the EPA. Does not seem like the EPA is in a rush to give them to you. Your mic is not on. All right, while we're working on that, I'll bring in Krissy. You are right over one of those contaminated creeks. I was at your house a few months ago. I think I could last 20 seconds in your house before I went outside because it smelled so bad. On the porch interviewing you, the chemicals, my eyes were burning. And when I went over the creek, my eyes burned more and I had a sore throat. And there are people still living right there. They have temporarily relocated you, but there's still people living there. And that creek and whatever contaminants are in it are still spreading throughout town. I want to, before I go through what is really, I think, a 5-alarm fire in terms of the attorneys and the EPA and all this, you originally, were in communications with the plaintiff's attorneys. They're supposed to be representing you, other residents in East Palestine, Western Pennsylvania. But something seemed to change. The tone seemed to change from the obvious, residents are sick here, we need justice, and suddenly seemingly minimizing this.
Yes. They have surpassed Norfolk Southern and the EPA with gaslighting the residents. The people, we knew that the EPA would do this and that Norfolk Southern would, but you didn't see it coming with someone that was supposed to be fighting for you to just totally change on a drop of a dime and encourage. And they even, like, Norfolk Southern and these attorneys are working together through that settlement center now. They, definitely are in a lot of talks together.
So let's get into this, Colin. I'm going to go through a couple images here. So I want to go through, here's a list of some of the attorneys, because there's attorneys from different law firms that are representing East Palestine residents like you, Pennsylvania residents. These were court-appointed attorneys. I highlighted one because it immediately put up my red flag. Davina Pajari, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, an ex-EPA attorney who's now working for Norfolk Southern's law firm. So how about that for the government and corporate revolving door? We know that a lot of folks from the EPA and other government agencies then go to the companies they're supposed to be regulating. But here you have Pajari is an ex-EPA attorney working for Norfolk Southern's law firm. And she apparently, Scott, she served you with a subpoena in your driveway.
In my driveway.
Now, first of all, I don't know, but it does seem like a bit of a conflict of interest to me if you have a former EPA attorney who's now working for Norfolk Southern, because this is a settlement and a conflict between the EPA, Norfolk Southern, about East Palestine. So if she's a former EPA attorney and now she's representing Norfolk Southern, there's obviously a possibility that she could be communicating and coordinating with her former colleagues at the EPA in terms of trying to create a narrative here, minimize resident symptoms, cherry pick testing data, highlight certain testing data that doesn't show any problems while ignoring other testing data like yours. We're going to get into Stephen Petty in a minute, but isn't that kind of a glaring conflict of interest?
Yeah, it is, Jordan. And I'm going to tell you what Davina Pajari, I don't know how to say her last name.
And by the way, I just want to say before I'm attacked, I sent a long email this morning to all of these attorneys with a lot of questions. So they've had a chance to respond. If they want to respond while I'm live, I'd gladly read some of them. But I emailed these attorneys with specific questions about a lot of what we're covering. So this is not like a hit job. I've done my duty. Go ahead.
Yeah, and you know, I'm a private citizen doing private testing. I was only supposed to go twice, like I do in other disasters, and not stay there. But I saw so much that wasn't making sense, and this corruption with the EPA. But what Davina Pajari and Norfolk Southern in the subpoena in my driveway, all communications with residents, all communications with media, all my private testing data. I'm a private citizen, no involvement in the lawsuit. And then when the legal team at Government Accountability Project responded with my personal attorney, we told them to stop threatening me, file a motion to compel, we'll see you in court. And then after we responded in November, come January 18th, I started getting emails from plaintiffs' attorneys. And I was very clear that if I'm not in this to enrich attorneys, and if they wanted access to my data, I didn't do this to make money. I've spent right between 130, 150,000. You can reimburse me for my costs. I'll show you, because there's still outstanding testing that I need to pay for because I haven't gotten to anybody. So I was clearly very transparent about this. And also, when you get to Stephen Petty, I have background for you, and I need to explain why Krissy Hilton is so important with trends over time.
And I don't know if Leslie's mic is working yet. We'll work on that. But I sure would like to put in a Freedom of Information request to see if this former EPA attorney and the EPA, I'd like to see what their communications were, because she's representing Norfolk Southern and she used to work for the EPA. So we need to see if there's been communications with Davina Pajari and the EPA, because the EPA is supposed to be opposing Norfolk Southern in this settlement. They're not supposed to be working with Norfolk Southern. They are supposed to be, opposing counsel, so to speak. And the EPA is supposed to be working in this settlement really on behalf of the affected residents. So I don't know. I mean, I do know why Norfolk Southern would want a former EPA official representing Norfolk Southern. But I'd like to know what the communications were, because as we're going to show a little bit later, it sure does seem like the plaintiff's attorneys ended up bringing on experts that seem to be more defending Norfolk Southern than the residents. All right, so they subpoenaed you in your driveway. I don't know why. I don't know why Norfolk Southern's lawyer would be so eager to get your testing. It seems just like they were trying to intimidate you and obviously drive up your legal bills because it would cost money for you to defend yourself. But then January of this year, Colin, you have this too. Attorney Adam Gomez, who again, this is one of the attorneys that's supposed to be representing folks like Krissy. They're supposed to be the good guys and gals. He sends you an email. Dear Mr. Smith, per the court's December 8th ruling, yada, 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 we requested your full sampling report and any videos taken related to any sampling you conducted at Stephen McKay, who's a resident there, his address. To date, we have not received a response from you. This is our second request to produce pursuant to the court's December order. Basically, they're trying to get your data. This is the attorneys representing the residents. You responded, Adam, I attempted to call you, spoke with Cassandra and asked her to have you call me. I'm confused by your letter, especially when reviewing the court order. I never received any communication from you until today. I have no idea what you're talking about in reference to prior communications. I've never received any first request from you per the attached letter. Furthermore, you state in your letter, this is our second request to produce pursuant to the court's December order. It appears that this statement is false and not accurate, and I am not McKay's insurer. All right, so this could get a little complicated for the audience. So let me just break this down. Here you have a former EPA attorney who is now representing Norfolk Southern. They're subpoenaing you. Now you have the attorneys that are supposed to be representing Krissy and residents that are, to remind people, sick. We're talking cancer already. We're talking bloody urine, bloody stools, strokes, seizures, body tingling, severe memory loss, dementia, hair loss. I mean, these are just some of the symptoms. Women with periods that are going on for half the month, women whose periods have gone away for months, children who are getting periods much earlier, reproductive issues. This is all happening within 18 months. So we're getting into the weeds here, but the most important thing here is people are very sick. So why is the attorney representing the residents trying this heavy-handedness and their claim? It seems that they falsely said you're an insurer for a resident.
Yeah, and I don't have any answers to that, but the timeline doesn't lie, and I guess most people get in. Even some of these expert scientists on my team said, Scott, oh my God, I'd probably just roll. And so most people just roll over subpoenas, but for viewers, you have your rights too, and you need to stand up to these people. And then what they count on is just me rolling over and turning everything over, but I'm not party to the suit, and I'm going to protect the privacy of my media communications and communications with residents. And then when I actually read the order, an attorney involved with Seth Katz's partner stood up in court and said I was hired by Steve McKay. I was never hired. So they got very upset with me when I just pointed out the truth, because if somebody's standing up in court and making a statement about me, I want it to be accurate, which is fair. And I had, I'd followed up with this attorney Tudor Farkas you talked about. And I just want to come back to it, no matter how much the plaintiff's attorneys smear me, I don't understand why they're using the same narrative as the EPA, Norfolk Southern. It's in the best interest of the community. It's all worth it to get information to the community, because that's what I am here for. And I just don't, and I want to go on record again, because I know they're watching. I will meet with the EPA, Norfolk Southern plaintiff's attorneys. I don't take anything personally, for the right thing to do for the community. You share all the data in reciprocity. Stephen Petty's test, EPA, Arcadis will share it in reciprocity. And you've seen my emails, going on record with that, Jordan.
Yeah. So I want to also get to the point that they're subpoenaing you for data. Their plaintiff's attorney is, suggesting you're like an insurer for a resident, which they have no evidence for. But at the same time, they are working very, 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 they are hell bent to prevent a toxicologist named Stephen Petty to prevent his data from going public. And they contracted this toxicologist. So the plaintiff's attorneys, and this morning, they contracted Stephen Petty. He showed up to a whole lot of different contamination disasters. He was there in 2023. He did water, soil, air testing. I think he took between 7 and 30 samples a pop wherever he tested. Again, they hired him, but now they're saying that they cannot give what he found to residents, including the residents whose homes he tested. I don't know the legal basis for them. I asked them, why legally can you not give what he found to Krissy and others? Colin, let's play that 3-minute video that shows Stephen Petty in East Palestine, just so people kind of get a feel for who he is, what he did there, and it kind of makes you throw your flares up a little bit. What are they trying to hide by not allowing his data out?
One of the foremost experts in chemical spills testing was here in town today testing. We caught up with him.
Petty has been an expert witness in dozens of the top environmental class action lawsuits in the U.S. He says he came to Ohio because he believes independent testing is needed.
The public can handle negative news. They just want the truth. It's not wrong to tell them we don't know yet.
Do you think they're getting the truth here?
I don't think they've done enough. I think that they're being told too many positive things given the uncertainties.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us on this Friday afternoon. I'm Katie Houston. It has been a busy 3 weeks since that fiery and toxic train derailment in East Palestine. And a law firm is now on the ground there right now doing some independent testing on the air, soil, and water. They want to identify any toxins they can help to give some relief to families upended by the train derailment there earlier this month.
New pictures from a law firm going after Norfolk Southern with a class action lawsuit. This is their testing expert sampling soil and water for a suite of chemicals.
The big issue is I think it's premature to say everything's fine.
At each site, taking between 7 and 30 samples.
I'm looking for waters where things deposited in them, right? So I've done ponds, ditches, bird baths, buckets of water, and then we have sampled well and drinking water.
Stephen Petty owns engineering and expert services in Florida and was hired by Simmons Hanley Conroy.
Try to be complete as we can, and you have to be a little clever to try to figure out where this stuff was and what to analyze for.
He's testing for vinyl chloride and more.
I realized early on that from the literature, one of the byproducts of burning vinyl chloride is dioxins. So I suggested that the firm sample for those.
Attorney Jane Conroy has been meeting with homeowners, renters, and business owners, walking them through how a class action like this works, the types of investigation and evidence collecting they do. She says people are frightened.
The fear for their children, for their loved ones. What are these toxins going to do? We need to get some sunshine on this issue and these and the running of this railroad through East Palestine.
And the independent tester hopes to get in the rail yard next week to get samples from the cars. On the test he's doing this week, he expects them back in 10 days.
I wanted to have you come out so we could hear you a little better. You're down in there doing the samples, and you're with again
EES Group. On behalf of, I'm working for Simmons Hanley Conroy. The concern that I think I had originally was, when I was first asked to get involved, is they kind of said, well, everything's okay, but they didn't necessarily measure for a lot of the components, or not very much. And it's well known that vinyl chloride can burn, and part of the combustion products are dioxins. It's one of the most toxic materials. It was one of the key ingredients in Agent Orange.
Krissy, now, seems like a pretty credible fella to me. And I don't know, if I'm lawyers and I've paid money to contract with him, I sure am going to want his data out there. So you have been one of the residents that desperately wants his data. The lawyers told you what?
It was at a town hall that they had, that they could not release that data to us they had to keep the testing, but they could give you a summary, not show you your results, give you a summary of what they found and how everything was okay. And it was Jane, the lead, she said right in front of me to another resident, I can give you the summary. I looked at your testing and it's good. Norfolk has been trying to get my testing with Scott's. Yeah.
With all due respect, Scott, how are these attorneys who have no expertise in any of this going to determine that it's good by looking at the testing? Wouldn't they need experts to look at his data? Wouldn't you want a statement from the guy who tested to confirm that it's good?
Exactly. And Stephen Petty, let me give some very important background. I didn't know who he was. On February 2nd of this year, I was in East Palestine for the day after to give a presentation on the anniversary. I was invited by an independent journalist to do a Twitter X Spaces. I met Stephen Petty on there, and and we've subsequently done other Twitter Spaces with him on. Obviously, he can't comment on his testing because of whatever his contracts are. But I can tell you, Stephen Petty confirmed that he believes I'm the only one with trends over time in the same spot. And Krissy Hilton is key to everybody there because so the point is, you would think instead of Arch Carson, and I know you got to explain that background to the viewers, you would think Stephen Petty, his reports and his data, I would gladly sit down and cross-reference that to help anybody. But and the judge has even put in an order. I mean, of course, I'm not a lawyer. That the judge is going to err on the side of transparency and information for the public. You would think that those testing reports, especially if there's truly all of a sudden nothing to see here, it's about information and focusing on that for the community. But Krissy, I want to get back to this point. Krissy Hilton is important. Krissy Ferguson. Or Hilton, depending on
either one.
So she moved out of her house, like on February. What'd you say?
We
6th?
left. We left that Sunday after the derailment. Was the last time that we were back in it.
And I have trends over time in her soil, Jordan. So the EPA and this gaslighting narrative about it's your lifestyle. I have, surface testing in her house, furnace filters, and also soil testing that shows trends over time with it getting worse. So Krissy has not lived in that house.
When you say getting worse, you're talking about the chemicals.
The chemicals, specifically like the soil and the dioxins going up significantly. So
you don't have to be an expert to know if Stephen Petty's testing showed limited levels, Norfolk Southern would be suing to get that data out there. Norfolk Southern would be pushing to get his data out there if it shows everything's fine. So the fact that Norfolk Southern is not pushing to get this data out there would indicate to my bullshit detector that data probably doesn't tell everything's fine. I don't know. Am I a simpleton or?
No, I mean, you raised good questions, Jordan. And I know from residents, not Stephen Petty, I know I can use the Figley's name because I have permission. I know he tested Bob and Marilyn Figley and the owners of Brushville Hardware and Supply. I tested too. And if Stephen Petty's data is remotely even close to mine, that's going to show some problems. And he tested other residents and, and again, I protect residents' privacy. People like Krissy want me to there's other residents that have come forward where Stephen Petty has tested and I've tested too. So you would think for transparency and information for the public and the residents to make an informed decision for their family to opt in or opt out, why wouldn't this information be made available? And again, I'm still happy to sit down with anybody as long as we're sharing in reciprocity.
Lesley, is your microphone working now? I hear a dog barking.
That's mine. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, hopefully we get Lesley working at some point. If not, we'll do this again with her. So I want to get to something else because, what I find concerning if you have attorneys, and if the plaintiff's attorneys are watching and I have it wrong, or there's information I don't know or Scott doesn't know, feel free to reach out to me because I will be happy to correct anything. But you have a track record here of not just Norfolk Southern, but the EPA lying and concealing things. Days after the detonation, and when I say detonation, I mean detonation. They detonated 5 cars of vinyl chloride over East Palestine, Ohio, and Western Pennsylvania. And as George Thompson said at the top of this program, the toxicologist with 55 years of experience, that for some reason the plaintiff's attorneys didn't want to use. That's another red flag. It didn't just go to East Palestine and Western Pennsylvania. We're talking a massive spread to 8 states and Canada. So this is not just the East Palestine disaster. This is kind of a large portion of America disaster. But the fact of the matter is, within days after this, the Norfolk Southern was caught burying contaminated soil underneath the tracks. It wasn't the EPA that made them that said anything about it. It was residents kicking and screaming that they buried contaminated soil that forced the EPA to make Norfolk Southern remediate that. So they were trying to basically bury contaminated soil. I mean, we could go down the
EPA was present when they were doing that and did not stop them.
So we have evidence of that. We know that in the initial decision to detonate these cars, the owners of the chemical cars, oxyvinyl, were advising Norfolk Southern, you don't need to detonate the cars. They're cooling. Just let it cool down. Norfolk Southern basically blew them off and went ahead and did it anyway. And the EPA was standing right there. They knew that the experts were telling them you don't have to do this. What is the point of having a federal government or a federal regulatory agency if you're just going to stand there and let corporations or other entities endanger citizens? So we also know, and this is what I want to get to, recently another resident was communicating with Mark Durno, who's kind of the EPA's cleanup guy. He was in Flint. Now he's in East Palestine. And Mark Durno told the resident that, yeah, we recently detected vinyl chloride in the soil near the derailment site. Well, that's kind of alarming considering the EPA for 1.5 years have been saying we're not detecting vinyl chloride in the air, water, or soil. I reached out to the EPA and they confirmed it, but they then later that week put up a vague notification. They didn't say when they detected it. They didn't say how much they detected. They just said a low concentration. They didn't say how deep into the soil. So there's clear evidence that the EPA, even if you want to give them the benefit of the doubt, which I don't, and say it's incompetence or one hand doesn't know what the other's doing. There's clear evidence that they're withholding life or death information for the residents. Wouldn't the attorneys representing the residents be screaming about that? Wouldn't the attorneys representing the residents, instead of settling for $600 million, which would you knock off the attorneys' fees that they're getting? I asked them this morning, how much are you getting? They haven't responded. You would think that they would want more testing, more data. They'd be consulting with Scott Smith and George Thompson and any independent, but they're not. They didn't want to use George Thompson. They're adversarial with Scott Smith and demanding his data. Why? I don't know. Scott, you've gone through a lot of contamination. You know, Flint obviously had a legal saga, which also has some suspect things. This doesn't smell right.
No, it doesn't. And there's never been anything like this. But I want to add another very important point that I know from the experts, even the EPA's own expert. But EPA has their own dioxin expert, Brian Gullett, that's never allowed to talk to the press. And we've got some FOIA emails. Hopefully Lesley get. But the point is, forget about the vinyl chloride intentional explosion, which was a problem. There was a low smoldering burn from the 3rd through the 9th on polyvinyl chloride pellets. It may be that the bulk of the dioxin.
Can you explain what that means?
Yeah,
polyvinyl.
Polyvinyl chloride is the nastiest plastic known to man. It's cheap. You polymerize vinyl chloride and then you make the pellets. So there was pure vinyl chloride like gas on that train, but there were like 3 to 5 full rail cars of pellets themselves. And when PVC burns, it gives off dioxins and sets off other chemicals. So no one's ever really talked about that either. And the other thing we know from another whistleblower at Gap, Robert Crodel, and this is why I know that I was so attacked early on when I was in the creeks in February and March, that we know that the EPA instructed the pilots from the Aspect plane, that's the plane that was developed with 9/11 that can pretty much identify any kind of chemical. The EPA instructed the pilot to shut off the testing equipment from the plane. I mean, there's never been such blatant evidence in the timeline. This is not conjecture, this is fact. So when you look at the facts, and that's why I always revert to the timeline, it tells a story that it's pretty easy for anybody to conclude. But with all that being said, again, I don't know why the deflections from the EPA, the railroad, and the plaintiffs' attorneys, they don't want to divert all these smears. And if I can help this community, it's worth it. All this diversion and smears, it's like, it goes back to what Aaron Brockovich said. It's got have thick skin, and Aaron Brockovich has always told me, the closer you get to the truth, the more you are going to be attacked.
And I also want to show, because there's been quite the 180 here. In January of this year, this is one of the attorneys for the residents, Joanna Pollock. I don't know her. Maybe she's a good person, and I'd love to hear from her. I emailed her this morning, but she told the media in January of this year, residents have been living in distress and suffering health impacts. She said the fact that the community is still undergoing this cleanup process a year later, there's no end in sight, I think is particularly staggering. Now, that is advocacy that you would expect from an attorney representing residents. But how does it go from that to, as we showed last week when I was on the ground there, those same attorneys put forth as an independent expert a guy by the name of Dr. Arch Carson, who has worked for every corporate criminal under the sun, Exxon, Chevron, Enbridge, Dow Chemical. Sorry. They've been fined. They've been prosecuted. So I'll call them criminals, especially Exxon, who hid climate change for 40 years. He worked for them. I don't know him, but he certainly has worked for companies with a history of deceit, lying, and environmental and chemical contamination. And the plaintiff's attorneys cited him as an independent expert, and he did about a 5 to 10 minute presentation. I'm not going to show it now. It's on the live stream we did last week, basically saying it's my best judgment that there's no significant contamination in this area. It's my best judgment that if there's a problem health-wise, it would be maybe 1% of the population would have cancer. But he basically said the contamination there is kind of similar to what it's always been, citing, industrial pollution, yada, yada, yada. And what he's basing it in, it seems, because I don't even know if he went to East Palestine. I asked the plaintiff's attorneys this morning. I don't know if he went to East Palestine. I don't know. It doesn't seem like he looked at any independent testing. It seems that he only is citing the EPA's testing, which, by the way, we broke probably a year ago, that the EPA itself has acknowledged their testing is flawed because the equipment they're using cannot detect certain levels of contamination. So, Krissy, you sent an email, and Colin, if you have this, it's that email with the red marks.
Jordan, excuse me, if I may interject, Joanna Pollock, attorney, is chair of the science committee for all the plaintiffs, chair of the science committee with access to all the testing. And what she said, I agree, and my scientific team, everything Joanna Pollock said on January 26th to the media, January 26, 2024, we agree with. Everything her partner, Jane Conroy, said, we agree with. Everything Stephen Petty, we were in agreement, and then everything changed in April.
Yeah, well, they're getting nearly $200 million. The attorneys are, so maybe that's what changed. Colin, show the image with it's at the last image with the red marking. So this was a letter to you, Krissy, from some of these attorneys. Again, basically kind of going with this nothing to see here stuff. They told, attorneys, Russ Abney and East Palestine Justice had a MD toxicologist review your test results. I believe they're talking about this Dow Chemical doctor to learn what health risks you might face as a result of the toxins released from the train derailment. Here's the toxicologist assessment, which we view as good. I would expect this, meaning your home, right above the contaminated Sulphur Run Creek, which, by the way, in April when I was there, my eyes burned and my throat hurt. You might say that's anecdotal, but I mean, I walked into her house not a year ago, a couple months ago. I couldn't be in her house for longer than 20 seconds. It's a chemical petri dish. So let's see what the quote unquote expert said. Nonetheless, the test results do not show any significant contamination. So you responded, I believe, with Scott Smith's help here. Can you tell me who this toxicologist is? What testing data did the toxicologist review? On what basis does the toxicologist say there is no significant contamination? Has this toxicologist visited East Palestine? You go on to ask, on what basis is a toxicologist concluding that the soil samples are consistent with general historical environmental contamination levels in the vicinity? I mean, it goes on like that, but you're basically asking, are you getting this out of your ass or your ear? I mean,
Definitely.
and did you get any answers?
No.
And Jordan, that's to be clear, Krissy called me and replied all, and you've got my whole email chain. Again, these are the plaintiff's attorneys. I'm being professional, respectful, offering to go meet with them on behalf of Krissy and the community. And that's my writing in bold red after meeting with asking those questions, trying to be helpful. And
well, first of all, I don't, and George has said there's no scientific basis for what this expert said. But even if it was 1%, which I think he just invented that out of thin air. Even if that's a lot of people. I mean, you're not just talking about East Palestine. You're talking about Western Pennsylvania and several surrounding states. Lesley, let's try this again. You there?
I'm here. Can you hear me this time?
Wonderful, wonderful. So, Lesley, I know there's certain things you can get into, certain things you can't, but it seems we're showing, let's just say, very suspect potential coordination between EPA, Norfolk Southern, and the attorneys. But you with the Government Accountability Project, and you have been representing whistleblowers like Scott, Robert Quattori. Yeah. You've been putting in a tsunami of freedom of information requests, and it does not seem like the EPA is in a rush to give you those documents.
That's correct. We have a number of Freedom of Information Act requests out, including to the CDC, talking about the workers that got sick. Those are taking quite a long time to come back. We have FOIAs out to FEMA, asking about the unmet needs and where that report is that was supposed to be on the president's desk months ago. They're still working on that. And a number of FOIAs out to the EPA. But what I wanted to mention is, as you know, from going to East Palestine, talking to residents like Krissy who are suffering, and experiencing the health issues yourself, hearing these stories over and over. I got sick when I was there. Every time I went there 3 times. I don't care how many months it was after the derailment. I felt sick. I had weird symptoms. I don't want to get into all of that right now, but this is so real. It's very real. And then you couple that with the fact that, the EPA has a lack of transparency. Norfolk Southern has a narrative that seems to be in line with the EPA's narrative. And you couple that with Scott's testing, which is showing problems in the community and these dioxins that they didn't want to test for or admit they needed to test for. And it's very problematic. When I saw the video from Dr. Carson, it was like it was set up so that the defense could say, hey, there's nothing to see here. I mean, it was kind of weird, wasn't it, to see an independent expert for a plaintiff's group saying there's no health issues. There's no health issues.
And I just want to crystallize that. Okay. So this is kind of like Johnny Cochran. Excuse me. No, this is kind of like the prosecutors going after OJ, putting forth a witness that talks about OJ's wonderful character. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. The attorneys that are supposed to be representing the poison people, and yes, they're poison. That's not being dramatic. They're putting forth an expert to basically, I mean, this was George Thompson's words, the toxicologist of 55 years. Literally everything he said protected Norfolk Southern. And that expert was put forth by the people that are supposed to be going after Norfolk Southern. It doesn't make any sense. And you have to, I mean, unless they get back to me with legitimate answers, and I've sent an email asking them a laundry list of questions. It's there is a written timeline where their tune changed. Lesley, I want to ask you also. Your mic wasn't working earlier. We pointed out that one of the attorneys for Norfolk Southern was a former EPA attorney. Mm-hmm. I would assume, I don't know, but I would want the communications to see if the attorney for Norfolk Southern and if she was talking to the EPA and what those communications were.
Yes, we need to do a FOIA on that for sure, because I saw that the EPA addressed it, but they pretty much said, okay, this is fine. You guys, this is not a conflict. It was addressed internally by the EPA when I saw a news article about that a while back, but they basically said nothing to worry about.
Lesley, excuse me, that was someone else. That news article was someone else involved. It was not about Davina Pujara. It was somebody that was married to an EPA attorney.
Thank you for correcting me. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I think it's pretty black and white. For Norfolk Southern, if you have a former EPA attorney now working for Norfolk Southern, obviously there's the potential that she's got former colleagues currently at the EPA that she could potentially be coordinating with when they're supposed to be on opposing sides.
It's definitely a potential conflict of interest for sure.
Correct.
But, everything that we're seeing with the residents, everything we're seeing with this disaster in particular, hearing from Thompson, hearing from Scott Smith, hearing from this other whistleblower who said, there was a diversion from the way they use this EPA technology to gather chemical information in East Palestine. There's not enough information given to the residents. There's still things developing like the vinyl chloride pockets that you exposed. There's still problems occurring to this day, and they need more information is our concern.
And I want to humanize this because we've been getting into the weeds on the cover up. But while I was in East Palestine or around East Palestine last week, I spoke with a couple. I mean, their backyard was this derailment. Like literally the railroad is on top of them. They lived 100 yards maybe from the derailment and detonation. Somehow the EPA never came to their home. But I mean, just watch this. This is a longer interview. The whole interview is up. But these are not old folks. 55-year-old woman, pretty quickly after all of this, her memory starts to go. And now at 55, she's been diagnosed with dementia, which, I mean, you technically could get dementia early on, but it was very rapid. She was perfectly healthy before this. Colin, let's play that. Tell us about the symptoms that began pretty quickly.
Yeah, so I was home every day, and I would get a very scratchy throat and like some rashes. And then I noticed that I had this enormous growth on my face that ran down into my nose, into my mouth, and I had bloody noses, and they were big, like they weren't even cancer or canker sores. It was like a sore that was actually, it was out of her. I've never had anything like that happen.
So that would put it kind of spring 2023, you started having memory loss?
Yes, and it has just gotten significantly worse, and no one seems to know why. No one seems to understand why someone of my age.
I don't like asking a woman, but
Yeah, I'm 55.
okay.
I shouldn't have this severe memory loss.
And it started like a month or two, it seems, after this happened.
After the derailment.
Tell us about the symptoms that began pretty quickly.
Yeah, so I was home every day, and I would get a very scratchy throat and like some rashes. And then I noticed that I had this enormous growth on my face that ran down into my nose, into my mouth, and I had bloody noses, and they were big, like, they weren't even cancer or canker sores. They were.
It was like a sore that was actually, it was like,
it was
out of her.
It was like,
Yeah.
I've never had anything like that happen.
I don't trust anybody that's involved with Norfolk Southern. I don't trust the EPA. I don't trust the government. I don't trust anybody at this point.
Because
is that you didn't trust them before this happened, or because of the response?
No, it's because of the response.
And and how they've misguided people and lied to us. I mean, we can handle the truth. Just tell us the truth, and then we can deal with the truth. But don't, blow smoke up our butt and tell us false things. We went back to our home because they said it was safe, and it was not safe. I don't understand how people can sleep at night.
And I should say that their grandson was with them when this happened. Fortunately, for now, there's no issues with him. But you would think, Scott, that the EPA, those would be like some of the first people that they're going to their homes to test, because they're ground zero.
Yeah, the EPA refused to test, Shelby Walker and a whole host of people on Taggart Street that then reached out to me. And I want to add something. I volunteered to do this, so I'm not looking for it's about the residents, but I can tell you, I never had bloody noses. I had my nose cauterized. I had the same symptoms as them when I was doing 20 homes back in, August. So I can tell you, I don't even need testing results. These people are not lying. And when the EPA goes around with CTEH and tells people it's perfume, they're gaslighting, just like our vets were gaslit from the burn pits before Dr. Beatrice Gullum helped them figure out what it was, because they're turning around saying it's psychosomatic. And I can tell you firsthand, I experienced the same thing. I haven't come across one person that was making anything up.
And I want to zero in on what you just said. So the only testing that they got at their home, which again, the longer video will show you, I mean, you could see the derailment through their backyard. It was right there. They're 100 yards away. The only testing that was done, Norfolk Southern came and used their contractor known as CTEH. The New York Times did a piece on CTEH years ago. They're kind of the corporation's cleanup crew. They kind of come in for corporations after these environmental disasters and conveniently find nothing. CTEH infamously minimized the BP Gulf oil spill, among other disasters. So I don't know. I mean, residents have said to me it's the equivalent of your rapist handling the rape kit. So the fact that Norfolk's the only testing that was done in their home, which they were told everything's fine, was basically Norfolk Southern's contractor, not the EPA, not independent testing. And most residents, I mean, you've spent a lot of your own money on this. Most residents can't afford independent testing because it costs thousands and thousands of dollars. So clearly it's not fine. She's got God knows what was coming out of her nose. And sure, I mean, you can technically develop memory loss and dementia at a younger age than the elderly, but this was very rapid. We're talking couple weeks after this derailment, her memory starts going. And now dementia at 55 is pretty early. Another interview we're going to air in the next couple of days. I interviewed a 35-year-old woman, mother of 3, 7 miles away from the derailment. Her hair has completely fallen out. And she told me that there's four other women in the area, 30s, 40s, 50s, hair completely out. She's been diagnosed with alopecia. Well, in Flint, people were losing their hair, obviously different set of chemicals, but 35-year-old women don't just lose their hair if there's no chemical contamination. Obviously, we know of Wayne, who is 66. He got a scan 3 months before this derailment on his chest. It was clear. And then 18 weeks after this derailment, he finds a lump on his breast. It's double breast cancer, which is 1 out of 800 something men. Very rare. And he had to get a double mastectomy. I can't do cause and effect. I'm not a doctor. But what I do know is this would have to be the most historic case of psychosomatic, in world history. If everybody is just coming down with mental, whatever, it's in their head. It's not in their head. I interviewed an 18-year-old girl a few months ago. She was perfectly healthy before this. She was wrapped like a mummy because she was doing a 3-day EEG test because she's having seizures. And I got to tell you, I'm not one of these people, and I don't think Scott is, and I don't think Lesley is. We're not people just saying never believe the government. That's not what we're saying. But if time after time, Scott, in the beginning, didn't they have on their, buried on their website, the dioxin testing that they did?
Yes. We went, I found that, and took it to Government Accountability Project that, they classified it as waste, but the dioxin testing that Norfolk Southern Arcadis did, it's in line with testing that I've done. And Jordan, I got another way what you say about a rape victim. I say a murderer. Can you imagine a court allowing the murderer to do the DNA testing? Do you think the murderer's DNA is going to come back? No. That's what you have with Norfolk Southern. The murderer is doing the DNA testing and controlling everybody.
And also, Scott, I believe it was your testing, but you did testing on some of the local farming and garlic. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And can you tell me what you found?
Well, we did a control sample, and this is already in the public. So it's Tamerlan Freeze on Taggart Street, not where, right, I think literally across the street from where the people you interviewed yesterday. And they had some sealed garlic in their garage from before the derailment, the control. And then we tested other garlic, like at the fig leaves, that spiked very high along with theirs. And we just completed another round of testing, which I'm working with Government Accountability Project, that trend continues. Now, the crop data is limited, and we're very clear with the notes when I present, but the fact that the EPA dismissed all the garden crop testing by going east and testing barley and wheat, they didn't test one sample. We're calling for more testing. You can't, definitively make definitive conclusions, but our testing from limited data points suggests enough, Jordan, that you shouldn't be making blanket statements. You should be sampling garden crops all over that town. And the EPA's refused to do that.
And there was, I was going to say there was zero dioxin testing on garden crops in East Palestine from any government entity. Scott is the only person that's done the testing, and even though it is limited, it's high enough to be of level of concern because ingestion, it's supposed to be zero, right, for dioxins, but it's fairly high and getting higher. So it's definitely of concern, and we feel like that's why we wrote the duty to warn petition to the Environmental Protection Agency. That was about 2 months ago. We still haven't even heard word one, despite multiple attempts to reach out to the EPA. There's been no confirmation. They've received our emergency petition. They haven't acted upon it. And from very early on, they repeatedly told residents to go ahead and eat from their gardens, which we feel is dangerous.
Lesley, I'm going to ask you a broad question, and if you can't answer, I get it. But accountability is in your group's title. The media is supposed to be the ones pushing for accountability, correct?
Correct.
Right. So, aside from me, a couple others, there's a lot of smoke here. And aside from a couple media outlets covering this on the 1-year anniversary, aside from an occasional story from the Associated Press, I mean, hell, I pitched the Washington Post because I found evidence that the EPA detected vinyl chloride in the soil and never told anyone. And the Washington Post just said to me, we'll pass. I said, what do you mean you'll pass? Like, this is not like you say tomato, I say tomato. I have evidence the EPA is lying.
Right.
The Associated Press, local Ohio, Pennsylvania outlets, I was told from sources that they contacted residents after my story came out and they confirmed my report was correct, but they didn't report it. I'm not saying they're all corrupt, but I am saying where the hell is the media on this? Because this is not like, this is an ongoing disaster. And this is kind of like, when a kid puts a blanket over, and you ask your kid, you play hide and seek with your kid. This is kind of just like, let's pretend the obvious isn't happening here. Have you had any success with media outlets you've reached out to?
Yes, there's a few that we're working with. We are working with you, of course, Associated Press, and a few others. But it's been tough. It's been tough to get aggressive or even fair news coverage. When the EPA denied our whistleblower, Robert Crowdell's statement, said it was all false, and they provided their usual talking points for why they didn't fly the Aspect chemical sensing aircraft. It was completely defamatory towards our client, but and we've since rebutted everything they've said line for line. But some of these news agencies don't cover any of that. They just cover exactly word for word what the EPA says. Some of the local or regional, especially, just sort of covering exactly what the EPA puts out. Doesn't give us an opportunity to come back. They've done that with Scott a few times, and it's been quite unfair to Scott. So it's hard enough to be a whistleblower, but then for certain media outlets to, not get the truth right and make you look bad, right? Not fair. So we've had some problems with that.
Jordan, let me pick up specifically. I can give you a specific answer. Other than you and a handful of others, like Steve Middendorf and Rich McHugh and Christy Angelo, you're it. So thank you for what you're doing. You're the future of real news. So that's it. But I can tell you, major networks came to me where the reporters were furious because I know of 4 stories that were killed because I was told by the reporter that Norfolk Southern, along with the support of the EPA, threatened to pull advertising. One of those is a local paper. And I will be ready to the point where I'm going to name names behind all this stuff. There's a lot more I want to say, but I can tell you for a fact, 4 instances of reporters calling me saying their producer said, don't cover this. We've got to listen to the EPA. Norfolk Southern's going to pull advertising.
I heard that too, and it does not surprise me. And I've heard that in many other instances, not just Norfolk Southern, other corporations, because our media is owned by corporations. That's why you got to support independent media. If you two will humor me, I just want to read for the audience some of the questions I sent to the plaintiffs' attorneys this morning, because I think they're pretty obvious, and the plaintiffs' attorneys have not responded to me. Benefit of the doubt, maybe they'll respond tomorrow. I'm not holding my breath, but I think these are important questions that if they don't want to answer me, they should answer Lesley or somebody. And residents, I'd be happy to send you the questions I asked because this is kind of obvious. I sent this to 4 attorneys. They're supposed to be representing East Palestine residents, Western Pennsylvania residents. I said or asked, what was the scientific and or meteorological basis for the 20-mile radius as agreed upon in the settlement? Can you cite the experts and their credentials that were used to agree to that? Because the $600 million settlement that these attorneys agreed to, by the way, I've never, ever heard of a settlement this quickly for something like this. Flint took 6 years to get a settlement. And by the way, it was an inadequate settlement. And other communities, on average, it could take 10 years. So you got to wonder, why did Norfolk Southern so quickly want to settle? Okay. I also asked, you contracted with renowned toxicologist Stephen Petty to do extensive soil, water, air sampling in East Palestine and Western Pennsylvania. Residents tell me they've been told by you that you cannot provide them with the data, even for the specific homes that he tested, but told them it showed no contamination. What is the legal basis that you cannot provide Petty's testing to residents? And would you confirm to me that his sampling didn't show significant levels of contamination? I asked, I see Norfolk Southern had a former EPA attorney on the case, Davina Pajari, with Wilmer Hale Law Firm. That law firm recently filed to withdraw as counsel to Norfolk Southern. Throughout this process, have you had communications with this former EPA attorney and Norfolk Southern at the same time? And given the potential conflict of interest between the former EPA attorney now representing Norfolk Southern and the potential for coordination between this ex-EPA attorney and Norfolk and the EPA, did you ever contest her serving as an attorney for Norfolk Southern? I asked, sources tell me the $600 million settlement that Norfolk Southern has agreed to is actually the amount they will receive from their insurance company. Can you confirm that? I don't know that. I don't know that for a fact, but I've been told that by many residents. So this is just some of the questions. There's a lot more. I won't go through all of them. They're not, I mean, if these attorneys are not doing anything wrong and they're not doing anything nefarious and they just think this is the best deal they could get, should be able to answer these questions. Scott, before we go, you've done a lot of disaster response. George Thompson says this might be the biggest chemical disaster in history. I mean, that's saying something coming from a toxicologist of 55 years experience. You've done how many disaster responses? Over 50?
Well over 60, starting with my own 18 years ago when my whole factory was flooded out. That's how I got into this. And I started going into communities when I could help so they didn't have to go through what I went through. And I can tell you, like George Thompson, this is like all 60 disasters in one. Usually I'm going into a disaster where it's, some petroleum hydrocarbons, it's some other chemical. But this is all these chemicals I've seen all in one. And that ties into what George Thompson's saying with the mixtures of chemicals. This really is the mother of all disasters as to mixtures of chemicals, because you've got a low smoldering burn. You had lithium ion batteries burning. That's a whole nother thing. Those gives off chemicals that dissolve glass, and a whole host of issues. So the bottom line is, as George Thompson points out, this is like all 18 years and 60 disasters I've seen, every chemical I've seen is exposed and thrown onto the community all at once.
And my other question, I mean, obviously that's the most important thing. I mean, we're talking worst chemical disaster ever, but have you ever seen a response like this? What I mean by that is the EPA seeming to basically be a silent accomplice to a multi-billion-dollar corporation?
Great question, and I want to be clear. I have never seen where I've seen responses like this where I call it it's not a unified command, it's a unified propaganda center. But I've never seen so many mistakes and errors and so much evidence. That's why I dug my heels in and did what I did, because this is a turning point for the country, thanks to independent journalists like in the coverage you've done, to expose. This is an opportunity to expose it all and why everyone in this country should care, because your community can be the next East Palestine. You could be going through this next, because the evidence we have gathered, again, with the help of Government Accountability Project, it's the same as all the other disasters, but what's different, like I said, the mixtures of chemicals and all the evidence, the buried reports, what's coming out today, the whistleblowers coming forward. I mean, just shutting off the sensors on the aspect plane. I mean, the evidence is just overwhelming. Go to the timeline, look at the evidence, look at the EPA's own words and everybody's involved. This is not conjecture. The timeline doesn't lie.
And Lesley, my last question to you is, I mean, unfortunately, the way the American psyche works is the longer out from a disaster, the more it fades, the less the media covers it, the more people forget. And if they don't hear about it in the media, they kind of just think it was fixed. That would be your battle, right? That as a whistleblower organization and also trying to get information. the EPA and other entities that you're trying to get documents from are trying to drag this out and delay it so that, you know, this kind of fades into the ether.
Right, but we're going to stay with this for the long haul. We're going to continue to request documents. We're going to continue to work with whistleblowers. Currently, we have, oh gosh, 4 more whistleblowers coming forward to help with a project we're working on and related to East Palestine. We have an Office of Inspector General investigation that's well underway for the use of the Aspect airplane. So we are constantly taking a very deep dive into this, and we're not going anywhere. We're going to keep it in the news, every new development we have.
And I should say, and Scott, I'm sure you feel the same way, and perhaps have talked to people off the record. I know these videos get around. I mean, if you're a first responder who knows something, a firefighter, EMS, police, if you saw something that doesn't smell right in those days after the derailment, after the detonation, in the weeks, months after, Norfolk Southern was on the ground, EPA was on the ground. If you know things, and I know that there is a lot of efforts to intimidate you. I know there's a lot of efforts, not just intimidate you in terms of you might get fired or something like that, but your safety. Obviously it's easier said than done, but there are ways to protect you. And that's what groups like the Government Accountability Project is for. Because at the end of the day, yes, you need to eat, you need to feed your children, but we're talking about life or death potentially for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, because it's not always bodies, piling up right away. We're talking, as George Thompson talked about, after 9/11, most people might not know this, there's been 4,000 other deaths that happened over time. And this could be worse. So if you're a whistleblower, Lesley, how do people get in touch?
You can go to www.whistleblower.org. And if you go to our homepage, there's a place to do a questionnaire. It just takes a couple minutes, and we can go through that process and reach out to you. And I want to emphasize that you don't have to be out in the public like Scott Smith or Robert Crowdle. You can talk to us on background. You can talk to us as an anonymous source. And so a lot of people think, oh, I don't want to be a whistleblower because, I get attacked. Scott knows exactly what I'm talking about. But, you don't have to go that far. You can still be extremely helpful and do your, fellow man a great service by just talking to us and giving us the information we need to go after it.
I would just like to add, Jordan, I've got a lot of potential whistleblowers talking to me, and I know some are watching this, and I can tell you firsthand, you can trust Government Accountability Project and Lesley with your life, because I can tell you, you get subpoenaed in your driveway, you've got their whole legal department to help you. And I encourage more whistleblowers to come out. And at the end of the day, life is more important. You have children, you have grandchildren. They're not going to remember how much money you had. They're going to remember your legacy. Did you do the right thing? When you're back, did you do the right thing? And did you stand up to help improve this country and help it recover from the problems it's having? That's what it's all about. So whistleblowers, you can contact Lesley Pacey directly, and you're in good shape.
Thanks.
And I will say, I got to go because I got to watch my kid, but we're going to do this again for longer. We're also going to have George Thompson on the next panel. He's the toxicologist, more residents, because this is not something you could just let die down. That's been my battle with Flint for 10 years. It's very hard to keep this stuff in the news and make sure that people know that it's not some disaster or tragedy from the past. It's still an ongoing disaster, which, by the way, Flint still is. The water's still screwed up. So that's our task, whether it's journalists, activists, testers, to keep it in the news, and hopefully it will rub off on some of the media that has bigger platforms. So thank you, Scott. Thank you, Lesley. Thank you, Krissy. And we'll stay on this.
Thank you, Jordan. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And let me read some super chats before a couple public service announcements. Jeremy, $5, 197 years since its creation, and the railroad industry is still polluting our shit. You got that right. Super chat from Teresa273. I believe that's $20. Thank you. These folks need medical advocates to go to the doctor with them so they're not being gaslit from every damn person they rely on. Couldn't agree more. They also need something called free health care now. Jeremy, $5. Norfolk Southern needs to transport Flint water to all EPA headquarters, state and federal locations. Oh boy. Oh boy. Well, you're from Flint, so you could say that. Gone fishing, $5. So I guess Chris Grad and Teresa273 no longer recognize who I am. Well, that's sad. I don't know what you're talking about, so yeah, I don't know what that's about. Also, public service announcement. If you didn't get our Substack email, which if you're not signed up for our Substack, what are you doing? You can sign up for free, statuscoup.substack.com. We have a mega marathon DNC show coming up next week. It's a 3-day show, Tuesday through Thursday. We're calling it the People's Mic. Not only are we going to be on the ground in Chicago, John is going to be on the ground in Chicago covering protests and everything else. So we will have that, as always, on the ground. But we're also going to have really, really incredible guests. We're going to have Cornel West. We're going to have Marianne Williamson. We're going to have Crystal Ball, Nina Turner, Stephen Donziger, Ryan Grimm, Jill Stein, Richard Wolf, Indigenous activist Winona LaDuke. We're also going to have W. Mondale Robinson. He's the founder of Black Male Voters Project. Jody Evans, co-founder of Code Pink. Greg Palast, a great investigative journalist. Helen Hahn, a comedian and actress. Ron Placone, comedian you know. Lee Camp, comedian. Ben Burgess, Jacobin columnist, YouTube host. Alan Minsky, executive director, Progressive Democrats of America. Joseph Georgis, executive director, Our Revolution. Erica Andioli, immigration rights activist. I mean, you know anyone else with this lineup? I don't. So we're going to be on 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock Eastern time, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So 2 hours each night. Tuesday night, I believe, at the DNC, President Bill Clinton and Obama are going to be speaking. So that should be fun. Wednesday, I believe, is who's speaking Wednesday? I forget. Who's speaking Wednesday? Is it Obama and Bill Clinton Wednesday? I might have that mixed up. And Thursday, obviously is Kamala Harris and Tim Walz speaking. So definitely. You got to tune in next week, 6 to 8 o'clock. It took a lot of work to line up these guests. And again, we'll be on the ground too. So please support us. Colin, there's a website too for this, right? Where people could go and sign up. I believe there is. Let me get the website.
There's a lot of buttons to press. Yeah, it's let me pull it up so we can show it. It's watch.peoplesmic.live. Let me put it in the chat here.
So it's watch.peoplesmic.live. Unfiltered progressive coverage of the DNC 2024. Watch.peoplesmic.live. And go there, enter your email if you can, and you can see the full lineup of guests. I'm super excited. Again, it will be 6 to 8 o'clock Eastern time, and I think we have the best guests that any show on the internet will have. And we'll be talking about everything. Obviously, there's been a lot of issues in the among progressives over the last couple of years. The movement has fractured, so we'll be talking inside strategy, outside strategy, workers organizing, you name it, we'll be talking about it. Thank you for watching. Appreciate it. Please, if you can, support us. StatusCoup.com/join. Become a member for as low as $5 a month. StatusCoup.com/join. Become a member for as low as $5 a month. It is not cheap to go to Chicago for the DNC. It's not cheap. We just went to East Palestine. We just went to Dearborn to do on-the-ground reporting. It's not cheap to keep going back to Flint and everywhere else we go. As far as I know, we're the only independent outlet doing this kind of work. So please